Hello, I'm Citrus, and you're looking at the real grade RX-78-2. This was supposed to be the high grade Leo MPD, but all of my local stores sold out of them basically as soon as they got them, so that'll have to wait for a few weeks or months. This kit came out in October 2010, and it retailed for 2,500 yen, and at the time this was an incredibly ambitious kit, of course, because it was Bandai's first attempt to sort of squeeze all of the Master Grade's detail into a 1/144 scale frame. And this kit, being the first in line, of course, was not perfect. It was wrought with several problems that I'll get into in a second. Here's the manual, and you'll see here we'll have tons of plates with different colors. But the problems sort of start here. This is the B plate, which is the advanced MS joints, and if you built anything like the 1-year War Gundam or the 1.5 Master Grade or any perfect grades, you would have seen something like this, which is the pre-molded joints. Now this is the first time that Bandai's ever tried to make anything where the moving parts are this small. And the problem with this is that the joints are really tight, and when people were first building these, they weren't applying pressure to the correct places when they were breaking the joints, and very frequently they would snap the legs or the arms. And I think a relatively big gimmick when these kits were announced were the articulated hands, which you can see here have a knuckle joint in the middle of the fingers, which is very, very clever, but they weren't very good at staying together. And as you'll see from real grades that came after this, many of them started including fixed pose hands once again. A big part of the real grade aesthetic overall are the marking seals, and you can see very small, very fine stickers that you're supposed to put everywhere, and they look pretty good. But real grades also introduced these, which are metallic stickers that you're supposed to put onto various joints around the body. If that doesn't already fill you with concern, it should, because joints move around, and joints don't tend to be like big smooth parts, so these stickers usually tend to have many folds in them, and because they're metallic and they're not really printed, it's very easy to scratch the color off of them if the sticker doesn't come off altogether. A pretty good idea if you never move your kits ever, but if you plan to ever pose them, this is probably not the best way to do it, and painting the joints is probably just way better. But of course, the real grade does do some things right, and one thing that we see with many real grades after this one, and it only disappeared recently, is that many real grades used to come with multiple multi-injection plates. So you have this one that has sort of like a goose down color, yellow, the beam sabers, and some clear parts, and this one that has baby blue, 2 shades of red, and a brighter blue. So tons of different colors on the actual kit, usually making use of some sort of low contrast color scheme to get that realistic look. On some military hardware, especially anything that's been through use, you'll usually see some panels have been replaced more frequently than others, and because parts change color as they get dirty or get worn down or whatever, occasionally can end up with kind of a patchy look, and this is what the real grade look is based on. And you can see here next to this goose down color, you get 2 other shades of white, one that is more cold and one that is brighter. I actually really like how this works out on this particular kit because the whites look pretty good together, but on some other real grades where the color tones don't really quite match, it doesn't look as nice. And just taking a closer look at the individual pieces here, and hopefully you can see that the casting quality is pretty intense. You have these very, very tiny pieces, but there's no deviation, flash, or anything like that. And all of the panel lines that are supposed to be on these pieces are etched in really well. So this particular kit, I'm not sure when mine came from, but considering that this kit is 8 years old, doesn't look like there has been any degradation yet, which is fantastic because, of course, the real grade RX-78 has had a lot of different prints. And with these last 3 plates, even though the skeleton is mostly pre-assembled for you, there's still plenty of parts for you to put on yourself, so the build is still really interactive. A nice feature of this kit is the inclusion of an articulated core block, which is what this piece will cover up. So you can stick this inside of the body instead of the core fighter, and you'll get a little bit more bend out of the waist. And with all the parts covered, let's just take a quick look at the manual. This being the first real grade, of course, there are tons of color pages on it to show you all the great things that this kit is capable of. And I really wish more real grades these days still kept these colorful pages because it just makes reading the manual a nice experience. Sticker guide on the back is fully colored, so it makes it really easy for you to identify where all the stickers are supposed to go. And another helpful marking in the real grade manuals, which you've probably seen by now, is that the parts where you are supposed to connect to in each step are all colored in bright pink, so it's very easy for you to tell exactly how parts are supposed to fit together. Very helpful because tons of tiny pieces are involved in this build, and knowing exactly which way the pieces are supposed to go is really quite helpful. And of course you get these sort of cut through sort of views, so you can see exactly how the inner frame bits are supposed to move. Alright, so with all that covered, let's just dive right in. By the way, several people have asked to send me things, so I open a PO box. The address is right there. If you want me to send anything back to you, please be sure to tell me either in the package or message me directly here or on Instagram. So before we dive into the meat of the build and showing you the advanced MS joints, these are just the parts put together from the B plate, and you can see it's quite twiggy, and that's because there are actually quite a few parts that you would put on top of this before you get to the armor. And if you compare this with the tall geese that I built recently, you can see this is obviously much more complete of an inner frame than what we get with that kit. The whole thing is ball jointed everywhere. All the major joints are ball joints, and that's something that I'm not a huge fan of because I like swivels a lot more. Swivels don't tend to wear out as easily. Now, they probably decided to put ball joints on this kit to maximize the range of motion, but that does mean that everything can get a bit loose over time. So a key place that's really prone to damage is the knee. When you're breaking in the joint, it's very important that you move the joints as close to the point of rotation as possible. I recommend pushing on this bit here, and as you can see, if you support the joint from the back, it'll rotate, and pushing this as well helps push the part down. And it's kind of a similar story on top. Like so. You can kind of see how this area right here would be prone to breaking. And down here, this area would be very prone to breaking because they're comparatively quite thin. The ankles, fortunately, are relatively tight. And there's kind of like a pop that you can feel in there. And I think that's because the ball joint isn't perfectly spherical. And the top is where the connection is between this little peg here down at the bottom and this leg originally during the injection. So when you break the joint literally so that it can move, the little bits of the nub that's connecting them is still in there, which makes the motion a little bit gunky. And the arms aren't too bad. As you can see, the thicknesses are pretty okay all along the entire length. Just to be extra careful, always move it as close to the joint as possible. When you put on some of the other armor parts, it does get a little bit safer to move them because obviously all of the pieces are more reinforced by other parts. And then here are the hands, which have articulated finger not fingers because these three are sort of together, but you see that they move together down here on this ball joint, and there is a bend in the knuckle, which looks really good. Be very, very careful to never pop any of these ball joints out, because once they come out just once, the plastic is weakened substantially, and then it's very likely that the hand will break continuously over and over again, and then after that, it's very easy to lose one or multiple of the digits, and you don't want to do that. You can also see there's a wrist joint here. This is very tight, by the way. So just, again, be careful, move close to the point of rotation. And on the top of the shoulder is another ball joint, actually. So you can see here it can go up, roll forwards and backwards a little bit, and also go forwards and back. And the neck here is just a regular swivel. And you can see here, this is where the top piece used to be connected at the bottom. And there is a little bit of brushing going on here, but cleaning that up is quite difficult without damaging any of the other parts here, because this is such a tiny area to work with. Okay, jumping into the build now. As usual, we'll start with the weapons. Normally, I'd say something about how this bit isn't very exciting, so feel free to skip ahead. But this time I recommend you stick around because the part separation and molding here are incredible. The fineness compares well with the Master Grade version 2.0, which was the most recent release of the mobile suit before this kit, and of course, this is much better than any other kit of the RX-78 in 1/144 scale. At first glance, the beam rifle looks like it should be very flimsy, because the lower handle is only held onto the rest of the rifle by a figure 8 shaped piece, but the whole thing actually holds together quite well. I'm not sure why Bandai chose to make the internal piece of the rifle white instead of gray, but perhaps it's to better show off the color separation in the kit and to match the colors of the bazooka. Either way, the finished rifle is very detailed. A little paint can really make it pop, but I think it looks fine even without. One place that I'm very thankful not to need paint is the bazooka. The white barrel is cast in 2 cylindrical sections, one front, one rear, so there is no painting necessary or unsightly seam lines to remove. My biggest gripe with my favorite RX-78, which is the Master Grade 1-Year War version, is that the bazooka demands some very finicky masking to paint the white barrel correctly. Not to mention that matching the greenish white of the animation version or the yellowish white of the PS1 version is a huge pain either way. That aside, the real grade bazooka looks great all put together, very solid construction. The whole idea behind real grades is that the kits look perfect out of the box without any paint. I wanted to stick to that by not painting anything on this kit at all, but as we'll see later on, there were a few spots where I just couldn't help myself. Next is the shield. There is a piece that needs to be removed from the pre-molded joints for each arm. It's very important that we don't lose these 2 pieces because they are used here in the shield mount. The sliding mount is excellent, but the rest of the shield construction is mostly unremarkable. There doesn't seem to be much room in the design for innovation. Be careful of how you remove the yellow cross from the runner, because the way it's gated makes the long end of the cross very easy to break. Mine actually broke on the runner, and you can see where I've mended it. Up next is my favorite accessory of any RX-78 kit, which is the core fighter. This is a really admirable effort, especially at this scale, but there are 2 small problems. First, the canopy attaches to the fuselage by a clip that goes all the way back into the cowling, and there's no easy way to remove the fuselage after it's been inserted into the cowling, so I ended up having to top coat over the canopy, so the canopy did frost over. It doesn't look too bad in the end, but I imagine this would be pretty annoying for those who do mind. The second issue is that the slide mechanism for the tail doesn't move along very smoothly, so it's not very clear if the tail just needs a little more pressure to slide into place, or if it's just on the verge of breaking. Of course, there are holes all over the bottom where the minuscule landing gear are supposed to plug in, but that's a fair compromise between size and accuracy. I think the finished proportions are just a little off, so I can't say this is my favorite incarnation of the core fighter. Next to the Super HZM core fighter, there are definitely some scaling issues between the 2. And now we dig into the real meat of the build, starting with the feet, which is where the manual starts us once again. Right away, I'm blown away by the insane parts count in just this one section. Including the pre-molded joints, 13 pieces make up the foot, which most HGs take care of with half as many parts. Suffice it to say, Bandai quickly toned down their engineering for later real grade releases. The only problem is that the pre-molded joints used here are kind of flappy by design, so the feet don't actually stand up the finished kit very well. Moving up to the legs, we see just how much goes onto the skeleton to bulk out the kit underneath the armor. For the other leg, I put everything together with the metallic joint stickers applied, but most of the color on them rubbed off just during handling for assembly. Before applying top coat, I removed all of the joint stickers and painted over the areas where they were supposed to go with Sharpie. I can't emphasize this enough. Save yourself the trouble and skip the metallic stickers. No peeling, no curling, just use some Sharpie, seal it in, and it won't rub off either. As for the other stickers, I should point out that most of them are cut exactly to the shape of the surface that they're supposed to fit on. That means there's almost no chance of misaligning symmetrical decals, but positioning them correctly will take some patience. The sticker's edges should line up exactly with the part's edges, so there should be no excess decal sticking out anywhere. Once they're positioned correctly, the decals shouldn't catch on any moving parts either, so there's little chance that they will lift and peel as you play with the finished kit, especially with top coat applied. Once we safely assemble everything, the end result is pretty amazing. This is easily my favorite knee bend on any RX-78 kit. Next up is the waist, which feature even more tiny parts. The yellow V-fin in the crotch is set between two very small red pieces. It's very nice that no painting is necessary, but I was definitely sweating bullets while I was filming this section. On the back, we use two parts to assemble what will eventually grip the bazooka and action base connector. Be very careful here because the parts will also fit in upside down, but they can only open up when they're installed in the correct orientation. The small ball joints that attach the skirts to the waist seem to do a good job, but the skirts can't move up very far and can easily unseat themselves. Now that that's done, let's connect the legs, put everything to one side, and move on to the chest. The core block shell would look great with some paint on it, but I left it blank because it'll be covered up for the most part. I did paint the insides of the chest vents, but unfortunately, once the yellow bits go on, all of that detail is almost completely hidden. Some gold decals are supposed to go on the yellow parts, but I really don't see how those will go on without a fight, or even look nice at all, so I chose to leave them off. The chest stickers are also somewhat challenging to position correctly, but they should all fit into place without any excess decal sticking off of the parts or overlapping with each other. The cockpit may have some difficulty fitting in place, just give it a little push and it should rest snugly in the gap of the red waist piece. The torso doesn't seem to be as bendy as the high-grade Revive RX-78. Onto the backpack next, which features way more parts than I expected. Not counting the beam sabers, 13 parts make up the backpack. Be very careful here once again, because the little flaps that sit above the large thrusters are very small and can fit in place the wrong way up, so remember to pay attention to the manual. On the outer armor are probably the two worst decals to apply on this kit, because they're the only two that aren't cut to shape. Trimming off that excess cleanly is challenging because you have to make multiple cuts in different directions. And while you're trimming, it's very easy to nudge the decals out of position because the adhesion area is very small. We move on to the arms next, and we start with this joint cover piece. It doesn't really hold anything together, but it does feature the metallic stickers. As for the armor, the arms are easily the most fiddly part of the entire kit. The upper arm pieces just clip to each other and the pre-molded joints, so nothing really stays in place. All of this is to facilitate a sliding gimmick in the upper arm, but the effect is pretty weak because the armor doesn't move more than a millimeter or so. Fortunately, the lower arms are much more solid. Another nice bit of design is that the wrist cuffs firmly attach to the wrist sockets. This means the cuffs will stay in place when you switch between different sets of hands. There are plenty of bigger, more expensive master grade kits with interchangeable hands that have floating cuffs instead, which can easily fly away anytime the hands come off. Before attaching the arms to the body, we'll need to assemble the shoulders, which are unfortunately also quite fragile. I added a little bit of metallic green and red on the outer tips of the shoulders to match the aircraft warning lights on the 1:1 scale RX-78 that used to be on display in Odaiba. We can move on to the last part of the build, which is the head. The core of the head is all yellow, and that's all to allow the tiny gun barrels on the forehead to be color correct. The eyes are clear, and I opted to paint the backing piece gold to give them some color, but the forward and rear cameras are both solid red. I'm not sure how to feel about this, because solid red does make sense, especially at such a small scale, but I would have preferred clear plastic that I can choose to paint in clear or metallic red instead. Only 2 decals here, but the finished head still looks quite sharp, and once we pop it onto the chest, here is the completed real grade RX-78 with top coat applied. You can see it wobble a little bit as it spins around, because the feet just aren't very steady. Lining it up next to the high-grade Revive and the Super HCM Pro RX-78, the size of the real grade looks just right. Handling the kit now, it feels okay. Not incredibly sturdy, but not terribly flimsy either. The major joints are stiff, and you have to be careful where you grip the limbs as you move them around, so that you're not pressing on anything that's supposed to move, or applying any pressure in the wrong direction. Watch out for the thigh armor, which rises up a lot at full kick and can easily catch on the skirt armor. The hips can swing back and forth a little bit to help with that, but the movement isn't much. The ankles don't move much to either side, so that means you'll need to put this on a stand to get the most out of posing it. But here's the rub. The included action-based connector is terrible. This isn't a solid connection in the least, and the kit can very easily fall off. This connector is just not a good display solution, and I highly recommend posing your kit with something more secure. All that negativity aside, the hands can grip the accessories surprisingly well, thanks to the pegs in the handles. Keep in mind that the pegs do lock up the wrist joint, preventing the palms from being able to bend in and out. Looking at the finished kit, it's pretty clear that this was a very ambitious product for Bandai. The out-of-the-box result is amazing, but the assembly gets us there with almost no regard for the build experience. My patience was tested repeatedly by confusing fits, precise cut decals, and delicate, tiny parts. The real grade RX-78 is definitely a builder's kit, but you need to be a very specific kind of builder to really enjoy putting it together. It's not a bad value for only 2,500 Japanese yen, considering that Bandai recently decided that they're very comfortable charging much more than that for a real grade. But I'm still convinced that the high grade Revive is the better kit in the scale overall. It has the same articulation and proportions as the real grade, but it's half the price and comes with none of the mess. Of course, the best of both worlds is the now discontinued Gundam Front Tokyo version of the high-grade Revive, which includes decals that mimic the real grade look, but one of these can cost up to twice as much as the real grade these days. So if you have a delicate touch, a sea of patience, and a penchant for overkill engineering, the real grade RX-78 is worth a try. Otherwise, it's a pretty safe, hard pass. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.